Little bit of a light week 4 in college football. Most of the big games centered on the West Coast. Therefore, we go to the West Coast and Peter Loshak of Sportsbook Review to help us sort things out in regards to the early lines, where those lines may go, and his thoughts. So, Peter, of course, thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with USC taking on Arizona State. Trojans coming off a big loss, surprising loss as a 10-point favorite against Stanford.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The line hasn't moved much at all as of yet. It opened at 6. Now it's 5.5. It'll be interesting to see if the line moves. I don't know. My initial thought when I saw this line was that Arizona State would have value. I thought the line would go down. I did bet that initially at first. Obviously, it's a revenge game for USC and then the loss last week. But with USC-Arizona State, it's always a big game, no matter what happened the week before, no matter what happened the year before. The line hasn't moved much. It'll be interesting to see if sharp action does come in. The Sharps definitely bet against USC last week. The Sharps were all over Stanford. The public was all over USC, and the public was wrong. The Sharps cashed. That's kind of the way it goes every year with the USC-Stanford game. And this week, I do a call every week with a lines manager, and I'm going to ask about that game. I'm expecting that he'll tell me that the public is again on USC. Whether the Sharps are on Arizona State, I'm not exactly sure, but at first glance, it seems that way to me, that would be the right side.
All right, I'm feeling a little bit better since I took Stanford in 10. UCLA-Arizona, with these 5 teams in the Pac-12 South, very tightly bunched together in regards to talent and expectations. We saw it last year come down to the final week of the season, and the Wildcats pulled it out. UCLA, kind of a hot team in regards to a national perspective right now in the top 10, going to Arizona.
Yeah, this could be a tough one. I mean, anytime you're playing, they're coming off a close, mentally draining and physically draining game against BYU, and anytime, football teams, especially in college, when they play tough physical teams, the next week, a lot of times there's a hangover, especially if they're going on the road, especially if they're going into like a place where weather's a factor. It's always, people sort of underestimate a little bit how tough it is to go into Arizona playing like, 95-degree heat. It can be a tough spot. It can add to tough situations. Obviously, UCLA overall is the better team, but this might be a little bit of a trap. Again, will the Sharps come in on Arizona? I'm not exactly sure. But if you're asking my personal opinion, for me, it would be either a bet on Arizona or a pass. I would be very scared to take UCLA here, as impressive as they are in general.
Yeah, and that kind of segues to the BYU-Michigan game in Ann Arbor. I loved the Cougars plus the 16 points last week, and they took it down to the last drive. BYU goes to Michigan, suffering their first loss of the season. The Wolverines playing well against inferior foes in UNLV and Oregon State the past 2 weeks.
That line actually has taken a move in favor of Michigan, right? It opened at 4.5. Now it's up to 5 or 5.5. This one also, it's not clear where the public's going to come in. I'm assuming the public's going to come in on Michigan, but I haven't had confirmation on that yet. I'm assuming that that's the reason for the initial line move. Probably it's going to be a low-scoring, gritty game. Totals 45, which is very low. But if I had to make a bet on this one, I wouldn't feel comfortable going against BYU. But after the UCLA game, I wouldn't feel comfortable. A lot of times in college football, when teams get a close loss against a marquee program, they're a bad bet the next week, and a lot of times that can be a multi-week thing. BYU, though, they're 3-0 against spread this year, covered all 3 games. I would lean towards the under in this one, even though 45 is a low total.
Yeah, it's tough for me to imagine Michigan's a 5.5-point favorite in that game.
Yeah.
Moving on to the SEC, not really a home game here, neutral site, but it's in Arlington with Texas A&M playing really well against an Arkansas team that I got to say that I totally missed on last week, thinking that they would lay down the hammer against Texas Tech team that's been so weak on defense. And we know what Cliff Kingsbury had to say about that game and that matchup. Arkansas, Texas A&M.
Yeah, this is tough because obviously Texas A&M does very similar thing, to what Texas Tech does, right? And we saw Arkansas not be able to handle that. But, anytime you have like a desperate SEC team in the role of a big underdog, that's always a very dangerous thing to bet against. This one, it's just a matter of, we know what the strategies are going to be, right? Arkansas is just going to try to do ball control and pound it up the middle. And if they can do that successfully, definitely they will cover the 7.5. But there's also a possibility, and they couldn't stop Texas Tech, and Texas A&M is going to be tough to stop as well. My sense is that when you have a desperate team in this kind of a situation, my sense is probably Texas A&M wins, but more likely than not, Arkansas covers. The line has moved, though. It was 6.5 when it opened. Now it's 7 or 7.5, and I'm guessing that is most likely public action. That's probably not sharp action. Very good chance the sharp action comes in on Arkansas.
All right, and finally, a couple unranked teams, but this is a huge one in the SEC East. Tennessee would be the team that most would peg as the team that could possibly challenge Georgia. They go to Florida. The Gators look like a marginal team, but, hey, they pulled out the first real win that they need to get to postseason play and going to Lexington last week. They've won 10 straight. Does that factor into it at all in regards to the betting line when a team has been that dominant over a rival like that?
It can, especially in a yes, it certainly can. I mean, because fans do have that in their minds. I mean, much more. I mean, for the sharps, it doesn't matter at all, right? For the sharps, it's just power ratings and technical data. But for recreational bettors, it's a lot has to do with the preseason rankings and what they did last week and 2 weeks ago. But definitely, that's in people's minds. My personal opinion on this game, this is another one of those games where it's we know what the strategies are going to be, and it's just a matter of execution. So as far as it wouldn't be surprised if either team won this one. My sense, though, is that it's going to be similar to their game last year and a little bit similar to Tennessee's game against Oklahoma, which is relative. Both of them were relatively low scoring. The total's a little bit low for a reason. Right now it's 53.5. I actually think that the under 53.5 might be a pretty decent bet. As far as the side, basically a coin flip, comes down to execution.
Yeah, it could take Florida like 3 games to score 53 points against
right.
But the Gators do have the defense. And
yeah, absolutely. And so does Tennessee, though. Their defense stepped up as well.
Definitely. Ohio State, obviously, with the big struggles against Northern Illinois, even though it was 38-0 2 weeks ago, they were evaluated to have struggled on offense in that game. Have the national championship odds for the prohibitive favorite changed in the last few weeks?
No, not at all. And actually, futures odds don't get bet that much during the season. So Ohio State still 5-2, roughly market wide as the top choice, and TCU and Michigan State at like 7.5 to 1, 8 to 1 are the second and third choices. But no, Ohio State, the struggle against a team like Northern Illinois won't change anything in terms of futures odds.
Peter, I'd like to get your thoughts on one thing before I let you go.
Sure.
I hate picking games over like 3 touchdowns. My percentage just drops.
Yes.
Don't know who's going to be playing in the game. Don't know what the coach is going to do in regards to putting his foot on the throttle and crushing them or laying off and going into cruise control. Don't know how hard the kids are going to be playing who are out there. Your thoughts about big point spreads and whether you're a little hesitant once they start to climb like those 30, 35-point games?
Well, I'm not hesitant, but it definitely, the handicapping factors change. I mean, you start to get into motivation as opposed to pure skill. And in fact, last week there was a perfect example of that, right? It was Oregon against who they play, like Georgia State or something like that. Yep. And the line was in the 40s. And you look at that game, you think, how do you handicap this? But actually, I actually did a preview on that game, and Oregon State, as a lot of teams are, Alabama too, are not good bets. Have not been good bets historically as like a 40+ point favorite. They were 2-5 against the spread going back to 2011 as a favorite of over 40 points. And of course, we saw what happened. They got the easy win, but they didn't cover. Now Oregon's 2-6 against the spread as a 40+ point favorite. And with a smaller spread, but even when BYU, we mentioned this game earlier, BYU rarely a double-digit favorite, but they were 5 times in the last 10 years, and they were 4-1 against the spread as a double-digit favorite. So those things, do tend to matter. Some teams, first of all, you have to handicap coaches, right? Some coaches do like to run up the score. A lot of coaches don't. Alabama's a notorious team that's not been a good bet as a massive favorite like that. So it definitely, the handicapping approach changes. Are the factors any less predictive or valuable? I would say no, but you definitely, you know what you're looking at with competitive spreads. You're just handicapping, matchups and power rankings. And when it comes to big spreads like that, motivation becomes the main factor for sure.
All right. Very good. Peter Loshak from Sportsbook Review joining us each and every week to give us the handicapping side of college football. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you so much. All right. Great. Excellent. Thanks. Talk to you next week. Okay.